The work done to map the human genome and begin to make sense of it is, in many ways, awe-inspiring. Understanding the potential and peril that flows from it is almost unfathomable. Jamie Metzl is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and a member of the World Health Organization's Expert Advisory Committee on Human Genome Editing. His most recent book is called Hacking Darwin: Genetic Engineering and the Future of Humanity, and he joins us now from Vail, Colorado, to point the way ahead. Jamie, it's great to meet you. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Steve. Happy to be here.
Excellent. You write in the book that after nearly 4 billion years of evolution by one set of rules, our species is about to begin evolving by another. What's the new set of rules you're referring to there?
The new set of rules are humans driving our evolutionary process forward. For billions of years, we've been guided and driven by random mutation and natural selection, which are the foundations of Darwinian evolution. And now our one species among the billions that have ever lived suddenly has the ability to read, write, and ultimately hack the genetic code of life. And that gives us awe-inspiring, almost godlike capabilities. And the question for us is, can we use them wisely?
Well, humor me for a second here. If we go down the road half a century, what will people then be saying about the time in which we're living right now, apropos of what you just said?
I think they'll be saying that this moment was a quantum leap moment for the technologies of the genetics and biotech revolutions, just like World War II significantly pushed forward electronics and space travel. We're seeing that with these almost miraculous mRNA vaccines. What those vaccines are doing is inserting genetic code into our bodies, instructing our cells to produce something that wasn't already there, in this case, the spike protein of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and then to respond by creating an immunological response to what we have created. That's just one example of how we, our one species, is hijacking the tools of biology, and that's going to fundamentally transform not just our healthcare, but so many aspects of our lives, from the way that we make and consume food and agriculture, to how we use energy, to materials, and ultimately will transform our evolutionary trajectory as a species.
Let me take us off the path just for a moment here, because I want to find out more about you. You're a guy who came up during the Bill Clinton administration. You were on the national security team there. Terrorism was, the issue of the day. And suddenly here you are, a guy interested in our genetic future. Somewhere along the way, you came to a fork in the road. What happened?
Yeah. So when I was working in the thanks, Steve. When I was working in the Clinton administration, terrorism was something that my little office was focused on, but the U.S. government wasn't in a meaningful way focused on terrorism. My boss then and good friend now is someone named Richard Clarke, and he was the Cassandra of the terrorist threat. He was telling everyone who would listen that there was this big and fundamental threat that was coming and that we had to respond. And when 9/11 arrived, Dick, unfortunately, was the person who had sounded the warning, but the warning hadn't been heard. And Dick always used to say that if everyone in Washington or the world is focusing on one thing, your value add isn't focusing on that thing. It's trying to say, well, what are the big issues that aren't being addressed, that aren't being explored? And so for me, nearly 25 years ago, as I looked around the world, I came to feel very intensely that the tools of the genetics and biotech revolutions were going to change everything. So I started educating myself when I was ready, started doing a lot of writing, started testifying before Congress. Then I was doing speaking and I wasn't getting through. So I wrote science fiction novels trying to tell this story in ways that people could more readily absorb. And when I was on my book tours for those sci-fi novels and I explained the science to people and they suddenly got what was at stake, I could see their eyes going wide and they recognized that something big and fundamental was happening. And that was when I realized that I needed to write what I hope is the book on our genetic past, present, and future. And it's been really an incredible journey. I'm now, as you said in the intro, a member of the WHO International Expert Advisory Committee on Human Genome Editing. And what we're trying to figure out is, how do we govern what could be the most powerful technology in all of human history in a way that optimizes the benefits and minimizes any potential harms.
It's interesting, the corollary you make between you and Richard Clarke, because you share a couple of things in common there. And I well remember his appearance before the 9/11 Commission, where he was the one guy in the government to apologize for the fact that, and he didn't even need to, but he was the one guy taking responsibility for being unable to get the attention of decision makers to the fact that terrorism was coming. And here you are in a similar set of circumstances where you are trying to get the world's attention for what is about to explode on our watch. Do you think you're having more success than he is?
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to judge because success is relative to what happens next. There are certainly some people who are paying attention to these issues. It's more than it was before. The pandemic, whatever its origins, gives us an opportunity to recognize that something big and fundamental is happening. But as always, there's a race between, in this case, an exponentially advancing technology and governance and regulatory infrastructures that maybe even by definition only inch forward glacially. And because the speed of scientific advancement is increasing for all sorts of reasons, that mismatch becomes all the greater. And just to put some numbers on that, last year in 2020, the Nobel Prize in Chemistry went to Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuel Charpentier, who came out with a brilliant paper in 2012 describing the CRISPR-Cas9 genome editing tool, but it was really just a basic science paper. 6 years later, in 2018, the world's first CRISPR babies were born in China. This science is racing forward, and we're not ready for it. So I don't know whether I'm more or less successful, but certainly we are not successful enough at laying a foundation to make sure that we can use these very powerful technologies with maximal application of values and ethics.
Well, you mentioned babies, and I want to stick with children and parenting there if we can here. It is becoming, of course, much cheaper to sequence the human genome, and parents can, if they want to, some parents anyway, they can learn a lot more about their children's genetic makeup. Do you think this has the potential to change parenting going forward?
I think it has the potential to change parenting, and I think it will change parenting. But we also need to recognize that parenting is always changing. So when we have information about our future children, just basic information that we learn from our children, for example, oh, my kid is really good at sports or music or whatever, we internalize that information and we try to give those children more opportunities. So if we have that information and we understand that our future children have a genetic propensity to being really good at one thing or another, will that increase the likelihood that we expose them to that thing, whether abstract math or something else? I think it absolutely will, and maybe even in some cases it should. But what we're talking about is something even deeper than that, because this is not just going to change the way we make babies, but the nature of the babies that we make. So when does parenting begin? Well, maybe in the near future, or even now, parenting begins when you decide how you're going to have your offspring, whether through sex or through using the newer tools of in vitro fertilization, maybe embryo screening. And that embryo screening of pre-implanted embryos is going to be super empowered by our increasing knowledge of the genome. And although the first applications of genome editing to pre-implanted embryos in China was highly unethical and should be condemned, I think it's extremely likely, almost certain, that we will be using the tools of genome editing in select limited cases on pre-implanted human embryos at some point in the future.
Wow, I got to follow up on that because that is absolutely fascinating. So you see a future where more and more parents-to-be, are going to opt for IVF, even though they don't have to, because they want to genetically re-engineer the children that they're going to have? Do I hear that right?
Not necessarily because they want to genetically re-engineer their future children, but at least at first because they want to reduce the risk inherent in being a human being. And that's our entire healthcare systems are based on reducing that risk. 1 to 2% of all children are born with terrible and in many cases deadly genetic abnormalities. If we can prevent that or fix that before these children are born, so that rather than living 3-year painful lives before terrible deaths, these children can live 90, 100 years, I think people will be very comfortable with that. And we need to recognize that we, in the way that we're living now, we are not living in some perfect state of nature. Our lives are very, very different from our ancestors because we are comfortable using technology. Agriculture is a technology. Medicine is a technology. Getting vaccinated so you don't die from smallpox is a technology. This is also a technology which, if used wisely, can enhance our humanity, and if used poorly, can detract from it.
Well, let me pursue that, because I suspect there's not that much debate about using this ability in order to prevent a child from having a horrendous life filled with health travails, etc. Not much discussion
but
there.
There is.
Well,
in fact, there is. There's a whole community of people who are saying that the genome is sacred, and any engineering, any manipulation of the genome, even to make a heritable single gene mutation to eliminate a terrible, deadly disorder, there are a lot of people who feel that is crossing a line and quote unquote playing God. I don't think so, but that's why I think we need to do that carefully. But sorry to interrupt you.
No, fair point. But I guess where I was going with this was that's one set of ethical considerations. Another set of ethical considerations entirely, where I think you may get onto a more slippery slope, is how about messing around to turn an introvert into an extrovert? How about trying to mess around in order to have somebody be more empathetic or more intelligent or more athletic or something like that? Where are you on the ethics of doing that?
So all of these things are extremely thorny ethical questions. And first we need to, when you use the word messing around, well, we need to say, well, what do we mean by messing around? So one would be messing around would be we have everyone's genomes are sequenced and we get a sense of who is likely to be a world-class sprinter. That doesn't mean they're going to be, but who has the potential to be. And when we try to encourage them to step in that direction, that's the Plato's Republic model. Another option, which I've written about in my editorial not too long ago in the New York Times, where I was imagining a visit to the fertility clinic in 2050, would be in the process of IVF, when screening some number of embryos, whether it's 10 or 15 in our world today, or let's call it 10,000 if we use stem cells in the future to expand the number of eggs, and then choosing, well, you have to choose one of these embryos to implant in the mother. And then maybe people would want to screen for health, but maybe people would want to screen in the future for certain genetically determined or largely genetically determined outcomes. And then the third option of messing around could be using the tools of genome editing to increase the likelihood of one particular outcome or another. But because our genetic traits, most of our traits, frankly, are so complex, many different genes, and then interacting with environmental factors, it's not going to be that having a baby is like going to the Build-A-Bear showroom in your local mall where you just pick attributes, at least for many, many hundreds, if not thousands of years. But I do think that we will increasingly use the tools of embryo selection and over time limited genome editing. But these are very, very big issues that come with lots of critically important ethical issues that we need to wrestle with.
Well, to that end, I mean, if you're a Star Trek fan, there's a bit of Khan Noonien Singh happening here. Do you see a future that is more concerning in this area or more exciting in this area?
All in all, I am an optimist. Our species has been using all of our technologies to live our lives, to do things that at least we've come to believe are better. Would we have been better off without harnessing fire, without agriculture, without medicine, without air travel, without the internet, without all of these different things? I'm sure there are some people who are saying yes. These are technologies like every other technologies that can be used well or can be abused. When we imagine what it looks like when they're used well, we live longer, healthier, more robust lives. We enhance our humanity. We increase our capacity to have more healthy time to love each other, to write poetry, to innovate, to do all the things that make humans such a special species. If we abuse these technologies, we could use them to crash ecosystems, to diminish our humanity, and to do lots of terrible, terrible things. And the difference between those two outcomes is us. And that's why I'm spending so much of my life's energy trying to push forward an inclusive global dialogue on how we should best use these technologies in ways that enhance the benefits and minimize any potential harms.
I appreciate the religious argument that says we ought not to be playing God and we should not involve ourselves in any genetic changes at all. Period, full stop. That's a religious argument. I understand it. What is the scientific argument that says it is unethical for us to, if I can use my scientific term again, mess around here, to, for example, get rid of Alzheimer's forever, or sickle cell anemia forever, or cystic fibrosis forever? What's the argument there?
So first, let me talk about the religious argument. I think it's very legitimate. I mean, we have to, these are very powerful technologies. No one group of us can railroad anybody else. As a matter of fact, I was very honored just before the pandemic to have been honored to speak at the Vatican on exactly these issues. And I was a little surprised, but very happy when they commissioned me to write a paper on the Catholic Church and human genetic engineering, which they've published and people can find on my jamiemetzl.com website and blog. So there are strong religious arguments that I think we should consider. At the same time, there are some people, and I meet them from time to time, who believe that terrible human suffering is fate, or some people even believe it's a contribution to the rest of our humanity. I believe that the history of our species has been fighting against these kinds of terrible things. When somebody has a child who's dying of a terrible genetic disorder, I think those parents are saying, well, what can we do to fix that? If you gave them a tool to prevent that, most parents would want that. And so it's not crazy for us to say we're going to use the tools that we have to fight and prevent terrible and deadly genetic disorders. Everyone should ask the question, if it was your spouse, your parents, your children, would you want that? And I think the answer is yes. And so if this gets framed as an everything or nothing debate, we're all losers. What we need to do is find a sensible, wise middle path that can bring us all together and allow us to use these technologies in the best available ways that follow our most cherished ethical traditions.
Well, Jamie, let me make things just even a little bit more complicated. We're coming to you from Canada today. Canada is a single-payer healthcare system. We think equity is one of the absolute sine qua nons of our healthcare system. This notion of equity, what if we want to introduce the kinds of possibilities going forward that you have described to us tonight? But it's expensive, and public healthcare systems or publicly funded healthcare systems just won't cover it. We get into a circumstance where the rich will be able to afford to do this, the less well-off will not. What are the problems around that?
It's a really great and important question. First, let me say that I, for one, am jealous of the single-payer national healthcare system that you guys have in Canada. The United States is great for super specialized, high-cost interventions, but in terms of creating a public health infrastructure that helps everybody, Canada is a great model. The reason why we're getting so much great information about the pandemic from Israel is that they have a model, a national healthcare system that makes sense. And so issues of equity are absolutely essential. Equity and diversity are really the two most essential ethical questions that we need to consider. But those are choices that we are making. We are making decisions every day about how to allocate our resources and who gets what. And so I think we need to make different kinds of decisions, certainly than we make here in the United States. In Israel, for example, assisted reproduction is largely covered in national health plans. That doesn't mean that every application that anyone can imagine is covered, but some of the most important ones are. And so if we want to live in a future where we have equitable access to healthcare, including these tools of assisted reproduction, we need to start building that future now. And that's why certainly I believe the United States has a lot to learn from countries like Canada and Israel. And at the same time, there's a reason why a lot of this innovation is happening in the United States. And part of that is that we're flooding so much money into the healthcare system. But you're absolutely right. These equity issues alongside the diversity issues are fundamental to making sure that this technology can be applied in a way that enhances our humanity and doesn't divide us or weaken us.
At some point down the road, somebody is going to have to decide how this is all going to work. Who's that somebody?
So I'm spending a lot of my time trying to address that question. As you mentioned in the intro, I'm a member of the World Health Organization International Advisory Committee on Human Genome Editing. And what we're trying to do is at least recommend what a governance framework for these technologies might look like. And it's really complicated because in our world today, it's not just governments, it's not just the UN. Governance happens at so many different levels. And so as I see it, we need to have a top-down, bottom-up approach. From top-down governments, we need to make sure that every government has a wise regulatory structure in its own country that represents both international practices and the unique culture and history of that country. We need to make sure that we need new treaties on an international level. But perhaps most significantly, we need what I call a species-wide dialogue on the future of human genetic engineering that can begin a process of developing norms of behavior that can underpin all of those other things. And so that's why there's a race. There's a race between this exponentially growing technology and our ability to establish governance systems to use it wisely.
We know what mutually assured destruction was back in the Cold War. I wonder whether, given the scenario you've just described, if we have different countries pursuing different approaches, do we have a mutually assured, genetically altered future coming our way sometime in the future?
Well, I write a lot about that in Hacking Darwin. I call it the arms race of the human race. And if we aren't careful, we're going to have that kind of arm race situation. I write about this in the book, but it's not coincidental that the world's first 3 CRISPR babies were born in China, and the Chinese biophysicist was an extreme nationalist in everything that he was writing. He talked about bringing glory to China. So these technologies exist within the cultural context of us, of how we have organized ourselves. And if we aren't careful, if we don't try to find the right balance between local, national, and global governance, ethics, and norms, and we will be in that kind of situation. And we will be, if this technology works as well as some people think, in a situation where one country is doing intervening, and whether it's through embryo selection or genome editing or something else, in ways that are considered, rightly or wrongly, to give that country an advantage. And then other countries have to decide, how do they respond? Did they do nothing? Do they try to stop the one country, or do they try to match it? And that is a plausible scenario for the future, which is why we have an incredible urgency to try to do everything we can now.
Name of the book is Hacking Darwin. Absolutely fascinating stuff, and it has brought Jamie Metzl to our virtual studio anyway from Vail, Colorado. Jamie, it's great to talk to you. You stay safe and be well, okay?
All right. Thanks so much, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.